Hi everyone, and welcome to DataGraph Live. Today we're going to be showing you how to create a custom graph theme. And this is something that I think is really going to be useful for people. And I want to start this actually by showing you one really important facet of working with files in DataGraph that is going to be a great tip for you to know in case you're not aware of this. So first of all, what you're looking at on my screen is the data file example, online examples as we call them, and there is a new section that you will see called themes, and in this section there are 4 files. This is what we're going to talk about today. So what I want to show you, if there's one thing that you learn from this presentation, I'm going to show you the most important thing right now. So I'm going to start by just opening the first file, which is the default theme. This shows you a set of graphs and what they will look like if we go ahead and create them without doing a lot of additional styling. Now, I certainly I like this style in DataGraph. I think that the basic graphs look pretty nice. But what if you want to do something different and you want to see a different type of theme for these graphs that you've created somewhere else? So for example, let me go ahead and just open this with the MATLAB theme. So here's a series of the same graphs that are in a different theme. You can see the colors are different, the tick marks are different, the fonts are different. And if I want to take this theme that I've diligently created here and apply it into another file, all I need to do is select the objects that have my settings in them. I can copy. Now I'm going to go back to my first file, click a thumbnail of a graph, and I can just say edit and paste. And now the theme that I created in the other file has been added here. Now, technically in DataGraph, we don't have a theme setting. What you're doing is you're copying and pasting all of the settings that are associated with the graph and moving it into a new graph. This is a really handy thing to be able to do. So if you modify things, if you change colors, you don't have to do it in every single graph individually. You do it in one graph, and then you can copy and paste it to another graph. Now, what about the file that I'm also in now? So here's, I guess, the part B of the one thing that you should know or you should learn from this presentation is that I can then take these styles and apply it across my entire set of graphs all at once. To do that, I'm going to click over here in the right corner of this top object, which we'll talk about more. This is my style setting object. If I click on that, there's an option for set the same style for every graph, and look what happens when I do that. Now all my thumbnails have that same color scheme, and other things change too, like the axis tick marks turned inward. And I can do the same thing here for the sizing. I can click the gear menu and say set same canvas setting for every graph, and that changed them just a little bit more. That changed the size of the graph and the scaling to be the same as my first graph. So this is a really, really handy thing to be able to do within DataGraph, and I hope that I hope that you get that, because that has saved me certainly a lot of time. So with that, I guess first of all, I'm Pamela Schultz, and thank you for joining me today. If you have any questions during the presentation, then I'm happy to respond to those. You can put them on the chat. I'll be monitoring that. I hope everyone is doing well today. And I just wanted to, I guess, talk just quickly about what I think is so great about doing formatting and creating a themed graph like the one you see here in DataGraph. And the first thing is that the way DataGraph works, we separate the style from the representation of the data itself. That's what let me copy and paste these settings from one graph easily to another graph. The second thing is that DataGraph uses a top-down approach that's very similar to a style sheet. Anyone who's out there who's ever done uh, web programming, for example, where you make a website, it's a very top-down type of approach. Let me just show you quickly, what do I mean by that? Well, in this graph, for example, if I want to change this font, it's currently Helvetica 14. If I want it to be Gill Sans and I want it to be much larger, then I can change it in one place and everything in my graph updates. Now there may be some little tweaking I need to do, like changing the width here of my axes, but the overall approach of being able to change things dynamically, change everything at the same time, is an aspect of the way that DataGraph works, this top-down approach. That said, if you want to customize any individual bit of text that is in your graph, any of these labels, we'll talk about this in more detail, but you have all the control to do that as well. The other thing that I think is really unique about DataGraph is the use of variables. For example, here you have a scatter graph, and if I want to change the size of these points, then I can do that by using this overall point size variable within my graph. So I change this in one place, it's completely interactive. I can pick a size that looks nice, or I can go here and I can type in a size. And all of these entry boxes, in fact, that allow you to enter a number, you can also create your own variables and write those in there. We'll talk about that a little bit more. But that top-down approach, I guess actually, let me show you the other variable as long as we showed you the point. This is the other one that's automatically set up for every graph. This is the pen variable. So if I want all my lines to be scaled larger, I can change them in one place, top-down approach. But if I want something different than the pen variable, I can do that as well. So I can go down here, for example, to the outline for my point. If I want that different, here we go, this one, different than the outline up above, I can go ahead and change that. So by default, every time I create a graphic, it will have settings here. I'm trying to get back to, there it is, get back to my point variable there. Now that says point, I can slide this back. And when I get to the value for pen, which will be, yeah, there it is, 0.5, it will show the variable names pen and point. And again, those are what we set up above in the layout settings. Okay, so those are, again, sort of my top three reasons, I guess, that I really think this is that DataGraph has this unique approach for allowing you to create a graph and to do the styling. So what I'd like to do throughout the rest of this webinar is I'm going to start just with a new graph or a new file, just to show you from scratch, particularly for people that are new. I think it's good to sometimes start with a blank slate and talk just a little bit about these right here, this section that we've started working with. These are collectively what we call our layout settings. And this is the control center for your graph. And again, these are things that you can select them. You'll see a blue outline when it's selected. You can hold the shift key, select more than once, or you can even click and drag to select them. But they don't move around in the way that the actual drawing commands do. They're in a fixed location, and and again, we can copy and paste the settings and overwrite them, but we don't move them. Okay, so the first thing we'll do is let's just, again, very quickly, I'm going to add a couple of different sets of data. So here's one column of data. We'll option drag that to quickly make a second column of data, 5, 6, 7, and let's just, might as well go ahead and we'll make a third column of data, and we'll do 8, 9, 10. So if we wanted this, for example, to be a bar graph, now I happen to make these a text column. So let me change this to a number type. There we go. So now I have these 3 columns. I want these to be in a side-by-side bar graph. So I'll just go ahead and click the bars command. Again, this is using our default color theme that you see here. And by default, the styling is, the size is going to change with as I change my sliders. Helvetica 12 is our default font. But if you want to change any of this, then again, the place to start is within the style settings. So this first object, you'll see that the icon that it has, it looks a bit like an artist's palette. In fact, let me see if I can. I've been trying to get better at you. There we go. Zooming in on things to make it easier for folks to see. So here is the style settings object. Now for any of these, if you hover your mouse over the icon, a pop-up will show you what the name of this collection of settings is. So again, here's the style. And what does it say? We define fonts, lines, grids, tick marks, and again, this top-down setting, these are used by the other commands. So if I want to change my font, I can go here and select from this what we call the common font list. So this is the place I would start if you want to change the fonts for your graph. We've sort of curated a list that we think are common fonts that people want to use. And then again, you can use the slider to change them. Now, the other thing you can do here is you can change the common font. You can say, I want to specify a font. That brings you into the much larger font picker. I won't do that right now. But what I will do is open this up and expand it. And what you're going to see now is this much, larger list of settings. Go ahead and zoom out here a little bit so you can see this whole thing. And, if you're new to the program, this might look like, oh, there's a lot of stuff here, but let me break it down just a little bit for you, because you have the top section here. It all has to do with fonts. And actually what we have are these font groups. So there's the XY title font, axis font, label font, and local font. And we can override the main font, which is what we set up here to Arial 12, for example. And all these font groups, these elements of my graph, are by default set to the main font. But if I want to change them, I can do that. I can specify a different font here. But this is one of the things that, again, the style sheet kind of approach. If I want let me go ahead and zoom out completely. Here we go. If I want my font to, for example, if I want my axis font, well, actually, what I should do is probably add in, here we go. Let me add in a, for some reason, I seem to have disappeared. And let's see. So really to illustrate this, I need to add something else to my graph. So let me add, for example, a text label using a text command. So now I have this, and let me also add another label. This one. Here we go. Okay. And, oh, I see what's going on. Confusing myself here. Let me move these to the bottom so we can see the labels that I added. So say I wanted to provide a label to some of my bars and to type something in particular. You can always double click these and just edit them on the graph itself. But if I wanted all of my labels to have a slightly different font size, I don't have to go into the individual labels themselves and change them. I can go first into the style settings and change the label font. If you want the label font to be, for example, much larger than your other fonts, you can go ahead and scale them up here. And I really, I don't know why my overlay seems to have disappeared, but let me, so there's a question, do I have the capacity to pre-establish templates? Sometimes I have repetitive figures, and this is where you, again, it's that idea of changing, I guess two things. When you make a change in one graph, you can apply it easily to all of your graphs. So in case you missed it in the beginning, let me do another example of that right here. So say I'm going to just clone this graph. So now there's two of these graphs. And what I want to do is to change a setting in this one. So if I go into one of the other things that you can do in the style settings is change the colors. So we have this color menu, and the choices you make here actually define the colors that you choose when you're, for example, drawing lines or things like that. So if I want to change this to a different color scheme, I can do that with my presets. But if I don't want to do that over and over again, let's just, for the sake of simplicity, I'll create 3 more of these. And if I want that same color menu on all of my graphs, or maybe for some reason I just want to customize one of these colors here to a, oops, actually, not the, that's first ones are the line colors. This second group here, these are the fill colors. So here, now I see I've customized my first one to be bright blue. If I want that across all my graphs, I click on my canvas, my gear menu here, and then I say set same style for every graph. And there we go. Now we have the style applied to all of it. Now that's just, again, one example. The other thing that you can do is you can set up your own custom templates. So if you go under the file menu, there's a from user template option, and I have just a couple of examples in here, but you could create a file that has a style or a theme set up exactly the way that you like it. There's instructions on our discussion board, in our forum, as to how to set this up. It's not hard to do. You just basically make a file, and then you have to put it in a particular location in the Finder, and then it will go ahead and show you and be available here in this list. So you can always start with that. So I guess in general, if there's something that you find is here I am, is somewhat repetitive that you're doing, definitely let us know, because that's how we improve things, and we really don't want you to have to do things that are repetitive. We don't like to waste time, and we don't want you to waste time. Okay, so anyway, so moving through this, we talked a little bit about the layout settings. The canvas settings are the ones that are right below, and this has the important ability of setting the size of my graph. So if I know, for example, I want my size to be 6 inches by 3 inches, I can change it in this one place. And again, if I want to apply this to every graph in this file, there's actually a very specific option for set same size for every graph. Okay, now they all have that same size. Much, much easier than having to do this individually. And let's see. And then the last one here is the axis settings. And this same thing, you can copy and paste the settings that you put here into your other graphs. So the other thing that I'll point out to you is that for all of these, there is a help article online. You can shortcut to it is to go to gear menu, click help, and that will bring up the specific help article, for example, for the style settings. And actually, this week, as we were kind of preparing for this, I went ahead and added some additional detail into this style settings section on the knowledge board. So I'd really recommend spending a little time after this kind of going through here. You can see some of the things we talked about, the font groups, a couple of examples showing you how that works, the pen, the point variable that we talked about, and then there's some more information on line settings. I won't go into that right now. What I did want to show you and to move into is to talk about the graph themes that we have created in our example files. And there is a recently posted news article that has, well, a link to this video. This is very meta that I'm doing right now. But here you'll see also a table that describes each of the themes that we've currently uploaded. And so what do we have here? This is, for example, the style settings, where you can see the option in the column here and each of the different files that we've currently uploaded, the ggplot, the MATLAB, and the black and white, and the default. And you can compare what are the differences between these. This was actually sort of interesting for me to go out there and see if I could find out what is the documentation for the style for ggplot, for example. What is it for MATLAB? And what is the focus of these different styles? So for example, the ggplot style, if we go back to the, here we go, the example file. And any of you who aren't familiar with ggplot, this is the graphing language that's within R. So even if you haven't used it before, you've probably seen graphs out there that look like this with the gray background. This is their default styles. They have other styles that are in there as well. But if you wanted your DataGraph output to look similar to this, you certainly can create files that do that. And this is maybe the trickier one out of the ones that we have online right now. I guess the one thing I did do here with the ggplot is I did set the size to be the same as the default size within DataGraph. They don't really have a specific size because those graphs are similar to although you can set a size, the frame is similar to DataGraph by default, that if you move the size of it, the graph sizes in turn. Now that's very different than the sizing for the MATLAB theme, which, do I already have that one open? Let me open this. So the MATLAB theme is actually set up to be very printable. If you look at the size of the graph here, this is 8 inches by 6 inches, and this is a printable size of a graph. It's also set to a bit bigger font. It's Helvetica 14. And if you want to see, what does that look like in actuality, you can change the zoom menu to actual, and it will show you on your screen an 8 inches by 6 inches image, so you can see what it would print like. Or if you go in, even in DataGraph, if you say, you want to print this, then you can see how this one graph fits very easily on a single page. Now on mine, it does seem to want to print a second blank page. I'm not quite sure why that is. But if I just said I wanted to print, this one page here, it would print this to that size. So it's a bit of a different, a different focus. If we go back now to our list here. Oh, the third one, actually, let me talk a little bit about the size for the black and white template as well. So that is set differently to a main font using a LaTeX font of Roman 8. This is a much, much smaller size font. So it's more akin to what you would use for a publication. And for actually both the ggplot and the black and white, you'll see that there's a scaling that's added to scale the axis font a little bit smaller. And this is a common thing, I think, that people, would like to do. I certainly do this for a lot of my graphs. By default, we don't pick a scaling for you. But if I open up the black and white example and look at this one, again, the font set to, we're using here a LaTeX font, size Roman 8. And when you look at the size of the graph, it's small compared to the one we did for MATLAB. It's 2.5 inches by 2 inches. And oh, hang on a moment. And it is, it's unfortunate that hopefully you don't all see this. I need another person to be monitoring my chat. But anyway, and I see there's a question there I'll get to in just a moment. But the theme here is again set more for publication. So here, if I set my size to actual, on my screen, it's going to look very small because this is what it would be if I printed this. And again, if I wanted to go into, so let me expand this out. And one thing that's handy to do that I often do is this swapping of the data. Might as well do that here. So if you look at this this graphic and you wanted to, well, if you printed this, for example, it would be, it would be about this size. We can go ahead and zoom this up. Maybe not quite that big. We'll just do maybe 150%. But this really is a much more like something that you would put in a very simple publication. Now, publications these days do have a lot of color in them, so you may not want just the simple black and white. But just to see, I think it is important to particularly scaling the size, because the line thickness, the fonts you choose, they will look really different if you don't have things sized properly. So for example, if I kept my a 12-point font in a graph that I'm going to print to a small size, it's way too big. You really need to use, like, for example, an 8-point font is not uncommon for publication. Okay, so if I go back to my list here, let me just take a moment, and I see that we had another question. How do you do fixed access points? Let me see if I can share this. There we go. For example, x-axis is months for a year, with the year being labeled centered below. So if you want to, dates are a little tricky, I'll say right off the bat. So it would really, in some ways, depend on your data, what command you're using. Are you drawing it as a category, or are you drawing it as a number? So I'll just say that right off the bat. For something like that, it may be something where you want to send us the file, email that to us, so we can take a look at it. But in general, what I will do is I'll show you, for example, in ggplot, one of the things that I found when doing that example. Of course, I have a lot of files open now. So one of the aspects of the graphs within this style that's very different is that we have a, and again, maybe I'll swap my views to make this a little bit, here we go, swap the layout so we can see our commands a little bit better. So the, sorry about that. So the, when we look at this, what you see is this graph that has a gray background, and it has white lines in between as the grid lines. Now, this is not a style that we use by default. And one of the things that I found in DataGraph is that when I created a graph with this format and made the canvas gray and added white grid lines, that DataGraph wanted to put a lot more lines than you would typically see in this style graphic. So right now I just went into the axis settings, for example, and there's an option for X tick marks and Y tick marks. By default, everything is set to an automatic, and we try and pick something using, a hierarchy of uh, of uh, logic to try and pick something that looks nice. But this looks a little bit cluttered with all that white, or with all those lines. So to change that, I just changed the X tick mark to uniform and changed the stride to 1, so that you can see now there's a lot less tick marks below, and this is more what these graphs typically look like when they're created in ggplot, that they don't have as many minor grid tick marks as we typically do by default. So I guess maybe, Diane, sort of a general answer to your question is that this is the section that you would change the tick marks. Now, again, dates are sort of a special case, so I would kind of need to really look at that data and see what you're having issues with. But as always, you can go into the help menu, and there's an option there to directly send us an email if you want to do that, or of course ask it on the forum. So if anyone has any other questions about anything, please feel free to pop them on the chat. I want to, and there's a bunch of other things that I can continue to show you in these files, but feel free, let me know if you have any questions. So what I'll do is I'm going to go back to the web page, and in fact, I should probably, well, if you go to our community page, then that's where this web page is that I'm on right now, that has this table of the style settings that I use for these different styles. And one of the things that I did with both of these, or well, both the ggplot and the MATLAB, the black and white was pretty easy, is changing the colors. Both the main colors and then the error colors I changed to be different. So let me talk about that for just a moment, because in these files, in the first graphic, you'll find in the bar graph for both the ggplot and the MATLAB file, you'll see the where I'm getting the color scheme from. In fact, these actually, the hex codes for the colors are things that I got from R. There's a scales package within R that you can output all different types of color schemes. And then I added those here where I have the color presets into each one of these tiles. And the way that you do this is you click on a tile that brings up the color picker. Within the color picker, there is a section for color sliders. If you click on that and go to the RGB sliders, then there is a section where you can input a hex code. And once you change something here, then you will see it reflected in your graph. Now, the way that these colors are set up, if you hover over any of these, they're actually set up first line color 1, line color 2, line color 3, and then we have the fill colors. Now, what I decided to do for the ggplot colors is just to repeat the 6 colors that are part of a 6-hue color theme that they use. So for example, actually, let me show you one thing that I think is interesting. If we look at this data, and let's just look at the bar graph data, for example, and I'm going to add another column. So this will be my third column, and we'll make this 8 and 9. Now, to add this data into my existing bar command, I can expand this command out, and here's where you see where the data is located. Now, you can click these plus menus here and add them. One really handy tip is just to go to the object in the data list over here on the left and just drag it and drop it right onto the command, and then it adds that additional data into my graph. And again, this is, using these color schemes. So if I'll just, to make this easy, I'll just add a couple more. I can do the same thing, just keep dragging and dropping them on there. And I think we'll just do, just do option, drag, create another one. And actually didn't, here we go. Let me do this one more time. Drop it on the command. So here you have the full set of colors that are in this color scheme. And I kind of ordered them in a way that is actually somewhat different than the order that they have in R, but I wanted it to be easier to distinguish between these colors here right in the beginning. When the two blues were next to each other, I thought it was kind of hard to distinguish. Anyway, this color scheme for all of these is, again, what we set up here. But if I change any of these tiles, like I did for this first one, I can even click the tile and drag it and drop it over here to have it repeat for the fill. Now, admittedly, it is a little tedious to have to go in, go here, if you're using the hex codes, to type in the hex code, and then you have to do it for the next one, and then the next one. And that's what I did. I just copy and pasted each of the hex codes into each one of these tiles. And then once I had it done once, I just drag and dropped each tile to copy it. One of the things we're talking about doing is having you be able to set that in the preferences so that you can have a bit of an easier time of adding in a color scheme. And when you did, then you would have that a list of your own color schemes in this presets menu. So we have not done that yet, but that's one of the things that after doing this exercise myself, I thought, that would be a much nicer way to be able to do this. So a couple of other aspects in this theme are the canvas here is one of the things. Having the gray canvas is different. And this is something that we set in the canvas settings. In fact, you have the option for setting colors for the overall background, the axis background, and the foreground. And so I set here the axis background to the color gray. And once that was set, then I could see my white grid lines. Now, one thing that's sort of a real detail here, but if you're interested in this particular theme and how I set this up, how I set the grid lines to be white, that is, again, something done within the style settings. Down at the bottom of the style settings is where we have a bunch of settings related to the lines within our graph. So here we have a setting for the major grid and the minor grid. And in both of these cases, I changed the color to white from the default of black. And what I also want to point out to you, if you recall, for those of you who were here in the beginning, I talked about how the pen and point variable, the use of these local variables within DataGraph is something I think is very unique and maybe a little different to get used to, but boy, it can really, really save you time in terms of formatting. And the variables themselves can be used in simple mathematical expressions within these entry boxes. So for example, if you look at all the line styles that are in, again, let me just outline this one more time. Oops, not that. That are in this, within the style settings themselves, notice how right here, something is set to pen. This is the axis line. So if I change this, it actually changes the tick mark lines. If I had a box around the whole thing, it would change that as well. And here's another one. The grid line set equal to the pen. I can change it individually if I want to disconnect it from the pen variable. But again, if I want all my lines just to be a smidge bigger, I could change my pen from 0.5 to 1. Maybe hard to see through the video, but that just makes everything just a little bit thicker and does them all at the same time. So here for the minor grid, for example, in ggplot, the minor grid is just a little bit thinner than the major grid. So what I did here is I took the pen variable and I divided it by 2. So that's why from this top-down approach, when I change the overall line thickness, it's changing all my lines, but it's also scaling because I set up this, this scaling factor here. So again, a little bit of a detail, but it's just an example of how, you know, you have control over what's in your graph in the style, and how this top-down approach means that when you want to edit a graph a little bit, it just makes it so much easier than having to go into each setting and change the line thickness for everything individually. So the other detail that actually is of note here that you may notice for those of you who are more experienced DataGraph users, this in the axis settings, there's a draw X numbers and draw Y numbers. And for the ggplot theme, we turned this off. And why did I do that? Well, it's because the default that we have is that when the default axis is drawn, there's always a line here. And the ggplot setting does not have a line associated with it. It just has the tick marks. The way that I did that is by actually having 2 commands that I added that are extra axis commands. There's one for the x-axis and the y-axis, and these commands are what actually are responsible for drawing the tick marks. You can confirm that by actually clicking hide on either of these, and you'll see exactly what this is drawing. And within these commands, it has a drawing style that I used here that's set to no line. Again, a bit of a detail, but an example of how even if the default settings that we have for the box style or the tick marks, if they don't match up to what you want in your graph, you have these other commands that can be used to customize things. And just like I copy and pasted my style settings when I was making my first thing that I showed you how to do earlier, these commands can also be copy and pasted. And in particular, and I'm not seeing any, I hope I'm not rambling on too much. Oh, I see actually there are a couple of questions. Okay, so let me just finish this last thought, and then let me get to those questions that are down there. Sorry, I hadn't seen those at the bottom of my list. But these commands that I added here, which is adding my legend and my axes in this different style of formatting, I can also copy and paste these and put them into a different graph. So if I have, for example, I can go to my, actually, let me maybe not do that. I'll just start again with a new one, and we'll just do 2, 3, I don't know, just some data here that I want to plot. And let's add a point to this. So if I want to use that style of axis and legend in this graph, I had already copied them. Let me just make sure I do this one more time. So you can see I selected them here. I'm going to copy them, go into the new file I just created, and now I'm just going to, I just have to click the thumbnail and do edit paste. And I guess I didn't give a name for my column, so let me make this data. So you can see how my legend is over here on the left-hand side. Now I'd have to hide my default axis, and I'd have to hide my box. So the box style is something that's also in the style settings. If I set it to only axis, now you're only going to see the tick marks because I've hid the defaults. Again, here would be my default with the line. Now I just have the tick marks and they're coming from here. Um, and and then the canvas, how do I add a background? Well, I can add it right into just my color there. And then if I wanted to have my my white grid lines, actually you can do this even from or maybe I want grid lines only in my y-axis. I can come here and say I want my major grid to be white, and maybe I want it to be a very thick grid. I don't know. Now, I guess one thing to be careful about whenever you're adding these commands is, of course, the order that they're drawn in, because now my lines that are coming from these are being drawn above. So I'll go ahead and drag that down. And now I maybe make my point style a little bit bigger. So again, this is, sort of the mechanics of how you can do this styling and move things back and forth between. So especially for the legend, I do that a lot, where if I set a particular legend at a certain location, and I don't then add a new legend, if I make a new graph with bars, for example, and I want the legend again centered at the right, the default legend doesn't do that, but I can take this one that I created for this graph, and I actually don't even have to do copy paste. You can literally click and drag it and drop it on the thumbnail of another graph, and then there you have your legend. Okay, so I know I need to pay attention to the time a little bit, but let me see so a question, how would you do a broken axis, integrate a very high value, let me show this to you guys, integrate a very high value in a graph in which most of the y values are much smaller. So to do that, actually let me swap the views again. This is what we would refer to as a broken axis within DataGraph. And it's actually done by splitting the axis. So maybe I'll do this more for the points. So if I wanted to have two different ranges for my graph. So I have this point that's way up here and these points that are down below. Then I can split my axis. Oh, not the x-axis, sorry, split the y-axis. And what I'm going to do is actually repeat my command on each axis. So I'll use the option drag here as an easy way to make a copy. Click option, drag that, place one on each side, and then you can, I'm just going to show you how I would click and drag here to highlight a certain part of the data. Now you can make the breakpoint exactly the same for both of them. I haven't done this myself in a while, so let me see. Yeah, so if I would restrict 1 to 30, so the axis here, this is my top axis. Well, I did it to 20. I'm going to do the same restriction here to 20. And now I have my data drawn, though I'm sort of odd the way the slope is different. Maybe I have not done this a while, and but the other thing that you do here is to change the relative height of these. So I can change my axis here to show the bottom points and my axis to show the top point. And I guess it may just be that maybe drawing these in as a line is not really the right way to do it. But if I did it instead as a points command, or didn't have the line, let me option drag this again. There we go. So now you could see actually this bottom point. I'll restrict this to 10, and I'll restrict this one also to 10. And so that's sort of the way to do it. Oh, but now to get the look of the broken axis, we do that by changing the, and this is a bit of a detail, but this option right here, when you create the extra axis, the space below, you want to change this to say a break. You can also change it to an exact break. But anyway, that is what creates this look of the broken axis, if you can sort of see that here. Now, it may be a little bit obscured by my choice of axis color in the background, where you'd want to get rid of that. I probably would not do just tick marks here because that's going to look a little strange. But now I think you can see a little bit better, hopefully, how it shows you this this broken axis. And I do think that in the online examples, if there is a broken axis break, maybe, yeah, okay. So if you search the online examples, here's a couple of different files that are set up with axis breaks. So those hopefully would also help you to understand a little bit better how that's done. But the mechanics of it, I guess I muddled through that a little bit to show that to you. So let me see. Oh, and actually, I should have paid more attention to the chat because someone told you that. So thank you for for pointing that out. But hopefully my demo helped a little bit. Anyway, thank you so much, everyone. Really appreciate you participating and your questions. I hope that this was helpful. I'd encourage you to look at the help articles for the various the layout settings, because I really think once you master these, you'll be able to easily create things like I've done here, and create your own templates. If there's a style that you're interested in us demoing and adding to the online examples as a theme, then that's another thing that we'd be interested in hearing from you. And with that, I think I'm about ready to sign off, unless there's any other burning questions. And again, you can head to this page here on our knowledge base, which will show you more details, and outlines the different settings for each of the files that I created. And oh, thank you very much for that comment that the example gallery is fantastic. I've wondered if it's been getting a little overwhelming with one too many files, to be honest. And one of the things that we're going to be working on is sort of looking at what files are seem to be used versus not used, and if there's some that we might cull from the system a little bit. But in any case, I think that going through this, and if you want to, as practice, trying to recreate what we did by using some of these settings. Hopefully I've outlined well all the different things that I did here, and what it's always interesting to do this, because I think one of the things that I learned with redoing this ggplot setting is that there were a couple of things that I thought, even though I created the extra axis to have to make just the tick line with no outline, maybe that's something that should just be in the main style settings, so I don't have to create an extra axis for it. But anyway, the ability to do it is there. And yeah, I do think that's good to know, that browsing the gallery gives you a lot of ideas. So we'll be careful about ones that we maybe move out or improve. That's another thing. Anyway, thanks so much, everybody. I hope that you have a good weekend, and we'll be thinking about what we're going to what we're going to do next week. And with that, I will say goodbye.